Okay, let's just jump right in with a massive question. One that's just as real today as it was way back then. It's this. Where does your freedom end and my freedom, my right to be safe, begin? It's a huge one, right? So let's really dig into what the people who built America thought about it. To make this real, let's talk about something we've all been hearing about. Vaccine mandates versus religious freedom. Can the government make you get a vaccine if it goes against your personal religious beliefs? It is a super heated debate, for sure. But here's the fascinating part. What would the founding fathers, the guys who wrote the book on liberty, actually do in a situation like this? And, the way they tackle that question, it's not just some old history lesson. It actually cracks open one of the most important ideas behind America itself. This is the bedrock principle they used to build an entire country, right from the ground up. All right, so first up, a modern dilemma. Let's really get into the weeds of this thing. So what we've got here is basically a giant tug of war. In one corner, you've got this deeply personal, super important right to your own religious beliefs. In the other corner, you have the absolute need to keep everybody in the community safe. And then, smack in the middle, you have the government, trying to figure out, okay, where do we draw the line? When do we step in? It's a classic balancing act. Now, to figure this out, the founders wouldn't just be winging it. Nope. They had a playbook, a really powerful idea that they all knew inside and out. It was their go-to guide for building a whole society, and it's called the social contract.
So, what in the world is the social contract? Well, think of it like this. It's the invisible handshake we all make when we decide to live together in a community. You agree not to do literally anything you want, like, I don't know, drive your car through a park whenever you feel like it. And in exchange for giving up that little bit of do-anything freedom, you get things like roads, stoplights, and, not getting hit by a car in the park. We all give up a tiny slice of absolute freedom to get a whole lot of safety and order in return.
And this is so important. For the founders, this wasn't some high-minded idea you'd read about in a stuffy book. Not at all. This was a tool. It was the nuts and bolts blueprint they used to build the entire system, to create a government that could keep people safe without crushing their liberties. Okay, so let's take this idea, this blueprint, and put it to work. Our first big test, liberty versus public health. So let's circle right back to where we started. Imagine a dangerous virus is making its way through town. And there's a group of people who, for deeply sincere religious reasons, refuse to get vaccinated. Now, their choice, which they believe is the right one, is putting their neighbors at risk of getting sick. So the big question is, how would the founders apply the social contract to this mess? And what's really cool is they wouldn't just all snap their fingers and agree. Oh no. You'd have John Adams over here, a guy who was all about the common good, probably saying, look, public health comes first, period. We need a mandate. Then you'd have Thomas Jefferson, who hated the idea of government telling people what to do. He'd be torn, right? Because on one hand, liberty. But on the other, he was a man of science who knew a plague when he saw one. And then you've got James Madison, the guy who pretty much wrote the Bill of Rights. He'd be looking for that perfect sweet spot, basically arguing that your rights end right where my nose begins. Your freedom stops when it starts to physically harm other people. So even though they'd come at it from different angles, they would almost certainly land in the same place. Why? Because the social contract says the government's #1 job is to protect its citizens from harm. So, when a personal belief, no matter how sincere, starts to threaten the lives of others, public safety has to win the day. And this way of thinking, it doesn't just stop at diseases. It gets even bigger when you talk about liberty versus the needs of the entire nation. Okay, let's try another one. Picture this. There's a piece of land that a religious group believes is sacred, absolutely cannot be touched. But the new country desperately needs to build a road right through it. Not just any road, but one that's crucial for trade, for moving troops, for the country's survival. So there it is again, a sincere belief clashing with a critical national need. So how do they get out of this jam? Well, they'd be super practical about it. First, someone like Benjamin Franklin would step in and say, all right, let's talk. Is there another way we can build this road? Try to negotiate. If that doesn't work, step 2. They'd offer to pay for the land, fair and square. But at the end of the day, if that road was absolutely vital for the whole country, and you can bet George Washington and Alexander Hamilton would be banging the table saying it was, then the needs of the nation, the greater good, would have to come first. All right, here's an even tougher one. Imagine it's the middle of a war. The country could literally cease to exist, but your religion says that fighting any kind of violence is a sin. This wasn't a hypothetical, by the way. Groups like the Quakers faced this exact dilemma during the Revolution. So what do? Does the nation's survival trump an individual's deepest moral convictions? And this is where you really see their genius for finding a middle ground. They didn't just pick one side. I mean, forcing someone to kill when it's against their religion, that goes against everything they believed about freedom of conscience. But they couldn't just let people opt out of defending the country either. So they came up with a brilliant compromise: alternative service. You don't have to carry a gun, but you can serve. You can be a medic, or drive a supply wagon, or help in some other way that doesn't involve combat. It's perfect, right? Conscience is protected, but the duty to the community, the social contract, is still met. Okay, so we've looked at some pretty tough scenarios. Let's pull it all together. What is the final verdict? What are the big takeaways from the founders' way of thinking? It really all comes down to 4 key things. First, the social contract. Being part of a society means you can't have everything your way all the time. There are trade-offs. Second, this idea of injury to none. Basically, your freedom stops where it starts to actually hurt someone else. Third, they were just plain pragmatic. They were focused on what would work in the real world to keep the country afloat. And finally, separation of church and state. This is a big one. They wanted to protect religion from the government for sure, but they also wanted to make sure no single religion can make rules for everybody else, especially if those rules would harm the community. And all of this leads to one single powerful idea. For these guys, freedom wasn't some kind of free pass to do whatever you wanted. It was a responsibility. It was something you had because you were part of a community, not something you used against it. Look, they spent their entire lives trying to get this balance right, the balance between what's good for one person and what's good for everyone. That was the huge challenge they faced. And if you look around today, you have to ask yourself, isn't that still the great challenge we're facing right now?